This bit's all about team development, I suppose, and the way that we're different in the team, the way we behave differently towards each other, and it's about understanding how those differences affect the way we work together. It's also about understanding how we can use those differences. So what I'm going to talk about is called meta-programs. Now, they're called meta-programs. The word meta means above and beyond, I suppose, is a Greek word, not that that's important. But they're called meta-programs because what I'm going to talk about is the way that we're motivated, which is above and beyond our conscious awareness. It's almost like a built-in filter, so they're very much outside of our conscious awareness. Meta-programs are all about motivation. They're about the things that drive us, the intrinsic word, I think it is. Intrinsic things that drive us. And meta-programs come from the work of Carl Jung, where he talked about different types of personalities and what makes people different. And it's good if we can understand them, because it might give us an understanding of why the other person in the team perhaps gets on your wick, for want of a better word, or why you get on somebody else's wick. And sometimes it's because we're doing things automatically. We don't realise we're doing it and pushing each other's buttons. So understanding these meta-programs can really help us, I suppose, make sure we're involved in the right parts of the work that are motivating to us, and so that we can move around, within the team and all be involved in the things that we really love doing the most. So it is about motivation. Motivation also is very much about our values. We talk about our values in the workplace quite a lot without really kind of understanding what values are. When we can really understand values, which are, I suppose, the built-in parts of us, the automatic things that drive us towards behaving in a certain way, once we understand those, we can help to predict how we may behave in a certain context or situation. So as I talk about these meta-programs, I want you to think of them as values, because that's exactly what they are. We're not using the labels that I'll talk about in a minute to label people, but they're just to give us a better understanding, really, of how we can predict what might happen in a certain context or doing a certain piece of work. So I'm going to give you some examples of what the meta-programs are. I'm going to talk about learning styles. I'm going to talk about how we reference the external world, how we're motivated differently in terms of our direction, how we reason differently to each other, how we interpret information in different chunk sizes, and how we view things like change and how we value things like sameness. I'm going to talk about learning styles in the context of how do we prefer to learn? How do we take in information in our own unique way? This is the first meta-program I'm going to explain. So we've heard the term visual as a learner. Maybe we've heard the term kinesthetic as a learner, auditory, and we may not be yet quite familiar with what we say as auditory digital. So these four words are the four main ways in which our learning styles may vary. So visual learners very much like to see the big picture, as the clue is in the word visual learning. So they prefer to learn with videos, with pictures and diagrams and things that really help to bring a subject to life. Kinesthetic learners, very much it's all about kinesthetic, which is a word for feeling. So they're the type of people who really like to get stuck in and actually just try and get on with the task. Auditory learners very much pay attention to the sound of the trainer or the teacher's voice. They will listen very intently to news reports. So it's very important when you're working with someone who prefers auditory learning to speak very clearly and notice your tone of voice and the volume of your voice, etc. And the fourth one we call auditory internal dialogue. Very similar to the auditory learning, although the slight differences. These people prefer to learn by taking in information through the visual senses and the kinesthetic sense, and then they rerun the learning through their own internal voice or internal dialogue to help them really make sense. That's an auditory digital learner. So I'm sure you can relate to this if you've ever put a wardrobe together from one of those big stores, you know, and it arrives, or you brought it home on the roof of your car. Depending on your learning style, you will approach the task slightly differently. So some people may go straight for the instructions and the diagrams, etc., whereas some people might just want to get stuck in and that kind of thing. So you've probably got an idea already of your preferred style of learning. And we're not one of these or the other, we're a combination of all of them, so these are really much about preferences. The metaprogram reference is all about introvert and extrovert behaviour. There's no wrong or right. It's really useful though to consider, you know, what is the task, what is the workplace like, and would that suit the preference of somebody who prefers either introvert or extrovert behaviour. Now, again, we shouldn't label people as introvert or extrovert, because we can be all sorts of different people in all sorts of different situations. So when we describe introvert, we need to remember that this is all about energy, and where do you get your energy from? So people who like to get their energy in an introvert way are people who like to spend a lot of time in their own company. They get their energy from within themselves. They're more self-reflective and I suppose internal in the way that they process their world. Whereas on the other hand, people who prefer to get their energy in an extrovert way thrive well in large teams, busy teams. They like to get energy from other people. So you'll find that they will be the center of a group of people getting all that extrovert energy. This might help you make sense of where your team is, where the way that you work. If you're more lone working, then this is going to suit people with an introvert preference. Whereas if you are lone working, but you kind of have a preference for that extrovert behavior, then you need to think about the times during your day and your week when you will be able to connect with the rest of the team. As we work in a more agile way, we need to start considering these types of things more, because again, they're intrinsic motivators, and if we can match the job right with the personality type right, then people are happier, the job gets done, the customer's happier, simple as that. So if you wanted to, have an idea of how to find out, perhaps in an interview situation where you might not necessarily know the person, if you wanted to have an idea of whether they preferred introvert behavior or extrovert, you could ask them a straightforward question. The question is always important. If you ask them the question, for example, when it's time to recharge your batteries, where do you prefer to spend your time? Their answer will give you a good idea of whether they instinctively prefer introvert or extrovert behavior. So the introvert will probably say something like, I like to, read a book or go for a nice long walk, etc., to recharge my batteries. Whereas the extrovert may tell you something like, when I want to recharge my batteries, I'll ring all my friends up and make sure we've got a good social event going on. The direction metaprogram is about asking, are we motivated towards an outcome, or is it that we're more motivated away from the consequences of not achieving that outcome? So we could say pain or pleasure. It's not that straightforward. So people with an away from preference, they like to spend time problem solving, thinking about all the things that could possibly go wrong when considering an outcome. People who are labelled as towards motivated very much just focus on what the outcome is and getting it done. So they don't often stop to think about any possible consequences of anything going wrong. Now, neither of these two people are right. People with an away from motivator are often labelled glass half empty, and people with a towards motivator are often labelled glass half full. If you're an away from motivated person, you probably think that the towards people who never ever stop to think about the consequences are a bit crazy really, and they should really stop and consider what could go wrong. If you're a towards motivated person, you probably think, why are they trying to put all these obstacles in place? Understanding this in the team is really great, because we can use both extremes of motivation here to really be, focused really well on just going for that outcome. But we should always remember the people in the team who can help us stop and assess any potential risks. So away from motivated people make great risk assessors, because they really do concentrate on what might go wrong, and that's quite helpful. Whereas the towards motivated people will add lots and lots of energy towards getting the job done quickly, etc. So they both have their benefits. The reason motivator. In this area, we think about, do you prefer lots and lots of options when undertaking a task, or do you prefer more of a procedural approach? So people with an options preference, they like to consider multiple options for getting the job done. They'll try it this way and that way and every other way, and if they get stuck, they've probably thought of another 3 ways that they can try. So they're considered as a kind of creative thinking approach of lots and lots of options. The procedural people very much prefer to know the steps of how we're going to get the job done. They like to know what happens first and second, and in a very straightforward order, what is the procedure of what we're doing. These 2 preferences are really important to your team, because we need the creative options. We need lots and lots of options to generate the best one. We also need to put procedure in there as well, because if we got lots and lots of ideas but no procedures, we're never going to implement any of the ideas. So procedural people can be seen as blockers by the creative options thinkers. But then there's there's a for and against for everything we're talking about here. Thinking of the context of the job and the type of job and where it is will help us consider, what is the best approach. If it is more of a creative role, then we're going to be looking for somebody who's motivated by creativity and, a number of options. If the job is a very, very, important in terms of having the right procedures, if we're operating in a nuclear power station and we're interviewing for a new employee, then we need to consider, do we want somebody who will try pushing that button or that lever, and if that doesn't work, they'll try the red one, or would we prefer somebody who's intrinsically motivated by following the correct procedure at all times? Next, we talk about chunk size. So this isn't about chocolate. This is about chunks of information, and the way that we all prefer information in a certain level of detail if we're going to process it effectively. So we have people who really like all of the detail. They love specific details of everything. And then we have on this hand people who like more of a global, they call it global overview. So do you prefer detail or one-liner headlines? So detailed people, they're the people who flourish really well in roles where they have to dot the I's and cross all the T's. They're great at proofreading documents and reports. They'll spot a typo in a 500-page document from a half a mile away. They have that ability to really zoom in on the detail so that you don't miss any. Again, a great asset in the team. The more global thinkers, they're the ones in the team who, they seem a bit vague at times. They'll give you a one-liner statement like, can you get that sorted? And they'll expect you to understand and interpret all the details underneath it that they've not actually articulated. No right or wrong in this. In the context of a team, there'll be elements of the job where we need to focus on the detail, and really home in on it, but then presenting that detail to different groups. We can't present all the detail, can we? So we need to be very clear about what are the headlines that we need to present, and maybe what's some of the detail in the middle that we would want to include. You probably got an idea of your own preference by now, in terms of, are you the detailed person, or are you more the global person in terms of detail? This has probably given you an understanding of some of the rest in the team as well, and what their preference might be, and where they might be best placed within the team. The relationship meta program is a really important one for us to consider, in terms of, do we prefer sameness in a situation or a context, or do we prefer difference? This is important as we think about things like going through changes. Most organisations are constantly going through changes. People who prefer sameness may find change more difficult to deal with. They may not, but in terms of the meta programs, people with a sameness preference, they like things to be familiar. So the word is familiar here. They don't necessarily like the room being redesigned and moved around every 10 minutes, because they like that feeling of sameness and stability. Whereas people with a difference motivator, they are the chaos creators, I suppose, because they're always seeking out difference. They're always seeking for things to be different. They are the ones who thrive on bringing in changes. In your teams, you'll have people who are motivated either by sameness or difference. That's not right and that's not wrong. If you are going through change and you're the person driving the change or bringing the change in, you need to be aware of the people in the team who are motivated by sameness, and consider, what can you build into the process of change, so that there is that familiarity, so that there is that stability for those people. The question we could ask at an interview to identify if somebody's preference was for sameness or difference is quite straightforward. The question would need to include the word relationship. So you could show the person a picture of perhaps 3 coins and ask them, what is the relationship between these 3 coins? Their answer will instinctively tell you which side they are motivated towards. So difference people, their reply will be something like, one of the coins maybe is different to the other 2. And the sameness motivated people, their reply will be something like, they're 3 coins, they're all the same. So whilst there's no right or wrong, again, it's just a good idea to get a real understanding of how the team are motivated in these different ways. So briefly, meta programs are all about our values and our intrinsic motivations that are above and beyond our awareness. They gave us an idea of why people go about things in the way that they do. And the why word, again, is very important in terms of values. People do things that are valuable, that they get value from. People's behaviour, in reality, is driven by their unconscious values. So they can give us a really good idea of where people might be best suited, where they might feel most motivated, and where they may be most happiest within a role. They can also give you a good idea when you're planning for recruitment and that kind of thing, of the types of personality that would thrive in the role. If the role's a lone worker role, or the role's in a team that has to work in a certain way, whether that's procedurally or whether that's creatively, and those types of things. So I hope that that's going to be helpful.